Hi, welcome back to the Custom Saber Shop on YouTube. And today I'm going to show you how to build a chassis for the inside of your Saber with parts from the Custom Saber Shop. Now you may find that this is a lot easier than you think. I know that when you look at the parts they look overwhelming, but I'm going to show you one specific way of building a chassis. Now there are hundreds of different ways to utilize the parts available. I'm just going to show you one. I'm also going to link in the description of this video to a thread on the forum at the Custom Saber Shop where people are invited to come and show pictures and descriptions of their chassis that they've built with the parts available at the Custom Saber Shop. So you can check it out, you can read, you can learn, you can get some ideas of ways that you might do yours. I'm going to show you one today, and there's a number of little tools and things that I'm going to be using today. Now you won't need to use all of these. Really, you may find that this is a lot easier than you think. But for today I'm going to be using a Dremel with a sanding wheel, and as such I'm going to use eye protection. I'm also going to need a Sharpie because we're going to mark some things. We're going to need some snips that are really strong and sturdy because we're going to be cutting through the 440 threaded stainless steel. So you're going to need something that's almost like a little mini bolt cutter that's going to be able to cut those. Of course you can use a hacksaw, but I'll show you a way that this works a lot better. You may need needle nose pliers, of course your chassis parts, some grease. And this is available at the Custom Saber Shop in smaller amounts, just basic grease for the threads. I'm going to use a leather glove to protect my hand against some of the sharp threads. Let's see, is there any other tools? I think that's basically it. Oh, sandpaper. You're going to need a little bit of sandpaper just to clean things up as we go. This is a 220 grit. Basically any mid-grit sandpaper folded up will work for you. I think that's it, so let's get started. Alright, I've got a lot of my parts laid out here, and I want to point out a couple of things. When working with small parts that like to roll around, sometimes you may want to throw down a towel. It's harder for the parts to roll off, easier for you to see them, you'll lose them less. So a towel like this can be a good idea when working with small parts, chassis parts. The other thing I want to point out, and this is a tip, is with chassis parts like this, order more than you need. I've got a number of extra parts here that I wasn't sure if I was going to need or not, and part of the reason for that is the chassis parts are relatively inexpensive. And so you order things like these that I'm not going to particularly use for this build today, but if I want to change my idea halfway through, I've got some options and some flexibility, kind of like Lego. The nice thing about these Custom Saber Shop parts is that they're so interchangeable and they work really well. That you can change your idea halfway through and kind of go with a new direction. I want to mention too that you don't necessarily need to use the discs for their intended purposes. Like I said, you can channel that out and use that for your color extender. These are discs that are actually designed, they won't work with MHS parts. They're designed to work with a Graflex. So if you've got a Graflex or a replica Graflex body, these chassis parts will work with that and will match up so that you can mount this with screws like this to a speaker holder, version 4, and you can make a Graflex chassis with parts from the Custom Saber Shop specifically designed for Graflexes. So, and there's all kinds of different options that, again, with the different chassis parts, you can monkey with them and make them work for you. So I'm going to build a basic chassis for you. I'm going to show you how I would do it. Obviously, as I'm mentioning, there are a number of different ways to do this. So here are some of the basic parts that I'm going to be using. I'm going to list all the parts that I'm using for the finished chassis in the description of the video, which is down below. So if you want to check that out, you can. So I'm going to start with the 440 rods here and the version for speaker holder. And of course the 440 rods, that's the thread, 440 thread. They actually thread right into the base of the speaker holder here. Now before I do that, what I want to do too is I want to take this, which is going to be the other end of my chassis, and you've got a number of different hole configurations here, and I want to basically build my chassis on these two opposing holes in the speaker holder. So I want to move this around and I want to find the holes that line up, and I've actually, you can't really see it, I've marked them with a red Sharpie here. Once I find them, just so I know which holes that I'm working with, it's going to be easier later on, as you'll see. I'll lay that part aside. I want to thread my 440 rod into these holes until it's nice and finger tight. And I'm basically going to cut these 440 rods later. So I'm going to build this chassis onto this. as we go. So everything's going to slide onto there. Now the first thing I'm going to want to assemble and have it right next to my speaker holder is going to be my recharge port. And now I've got the red components here. You can also you can buy different colors. This is an example of the recharge port component in a clear. When it comes, it's got this paper on the back, so you'll want to just notch that with a knife, and you just peel that paper off really easily. It helps protect it. So if you're going to be doing a lot of measuring and stuff, you're going to leave the paper on, just so that you don't damage your parts or scratch them up any more than you need to. And then when you're ready to go, pull the paper off. So lay those parts aside, and these are the parts for the recharge port. Obviously, with the paper on, it doesn't fit as tight. With the paper off, you get a really nice, really tight fit. So you don't even need any glue or anything. So these parts go in. They're going to snap together, but before they do, I'm also going to want to use these 1/2-inch spacers here. So I assemble that part. This is really simple. It's easy as Lego. Put on that part and it lines up. Carefully squish it together. These are very brittle acrylic plastic, so you don't want to flex it any more than you need to. But you'll see the parts go together, and you've already got the beginnings of a beautiful chassis there. And that part slides freely. Okay, so we've got the first part down there. Now I'm going to want to move to my next size spacer, and I know from doing this, I'm going to try to remember now, I'm pretty sure it was these 1-inch spacers are the ones that go on here next. Now the reason, I've already put this together just to kind of see what size of things I want. My chassis today is going to be for a Petite Crouton sound card. So I've got my Petite Crouton sound card here. Of course, you've got discs that are suitable for a nano biscotti and the same battery holder, or the battery solution. This is an 18500 battery from the Custom Saber shop. You can get the 18650, which is just a longer version of this. I like the 18500 because it delivers a really good punch, and it's small. So I'm going to be using that in a moment here. I'm going to put on my next disc. Oh, before I do, now you're going to want to pay attention to how these things work with your sound card. There are certain parts that don't pass over or pass through. So I know from playing around with this that if I gently compress and fit the Petite Crouton sound card in there, and it's going to slide all the way up to that yellow box, which for the life of me I can't remember what that's called, but I'm sure Irv will correct me. But basically that's where it's gonna sit, that's where it's gonna fit. So I want to get that all situated. Slide that on. Begin to see things take shape. But again, it's easy to correct if you forget something. Getting parts that are made for each other as opposed to things that glue together. Now you can see how this is coming together now. Now my battery, I'm going to want to slide my battery through those holes. So what I'm going to do is put the wires through. I'm going to use the wire end facing my recharge port. Now obviously you got to keep in mind too, I'm just building this to show you, how it goes together. I'm not soldering any of the wires at this time. So my finished product today is not going to have all the wires soldered together. If I did, I may want to take time and solder these wires to the recharge port before I finished building the chassis, depending on how I wanted to do this. But for right now, I'm just going to feed them all the way through. So normally those wires would attach to my recharge port. And I can slide the battery through the holes in the chassis discs that it's designed for, and you'll notice that it will stop when it reaches the chassis disc that contains the recharge port. So it's going to butt up against that, and it's not going to go any further. That's going to be part of what holds it together. So that's how that works. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up the chassis with these long, what are they, inch and, well, these are 2-inch inserts here. 2-inch spacers. So I'm going to finish up the chassis this way. Now if I wanted to, I could, instead of putting them on, I could use one of these guys. This is a nano biscotti sized chassis disc. It's the same outside diameter, and I do want to point that out. When you're building your chassis, you want to pay attention to the outside diameter of your discs and get the correct ones. Some of these discs, like this, are not meant to slide inside the MHS parts. They're meant to butt up. Oh sure, now it gets nice and stuck. There. It's meant to go in only so far and sit in there. So it's not going to slide through. These other ones, well, they're meant to actually slide all the way through so that I can build a chassis and I can still turn my part around the disc. So you want to get the right diameter of disc. But if I wanted to, I could build discs like this on here with different sized spacers. It slides over my battery and it could go butt up against my petite crouton, and I could build a crystal chassis on there. I could use a Dremel to carve them out, and I could mount my color extender if I wanted to use a color extender board with the petite crouton. So you can basically customize your little discs and make them work for you. But I'm not going to go that route today. I'm building it a little bit more simply than that. I'm going to put on my spacer discs, or my spacers. And I'm going to finish up my chassis with this metal disc. Now I'm going to list this one in the parts. You can also get a version of this metal disc that is threaded, so it will turn into the body of your Saber, and I'll show you why that's useful. This, I was actually going to build it that way, but I ordered this one instead. So that's going to be my chassis. I'm going to measure. I'm going to cut off these 440 rods. I'm going to use these little brass 440 nuts to tighten up this chassis and finish it up that way. If I had a threaded section, it would turn into the body of my Saber and would lock in, so it would hold itself in there like that when I'm done. As it is, this one's going to need to. I'm going to need to use a gender changer, a double male, and I'll show you how that works when we get to the next section. But basically, that's my chassis. That's what's going to hold inside my Saber. Now I have measured. So let's say that this is the part that I'm going to use, and of course these rods won't be here. But that's my blade holder is going to go here, and I'm going to use this section. And I've measured, and I now know that when this threaded section is inside here, this 5-inch double female is going to. I'm lining things up so that's going to give me just enough room that I can thread on my pommel, which also fits over this. So I know that the size of my Saber is going to work. What you may need to do is you may need to build your chassis before you finish and finalize the outside design of your Saber. You know, it would be a shame if you built a really nice Saber, ordered parts, and then the chassis parts didn't go together the way you expected, and you weren't able to finish the inside of your Saber to match the outside of your Saber. So you may need to actually build the inside first, and then see if the parts that you expect are going to fit together the way you expect. You may have to make some compromises and use a longer hilt section in order to complete your Saber. That's just a tip. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to thread on slowly these little nuts. So I've got my brass nuts almost all the way down there. It takes a while to actually thread them all the way down into position. And now what I'm going to do is, as soon as these brass nuts are in position, I'm going to cut my rod. Now when I do that, depending on how cleanly I cut it, I may not be able to get this chassis apart again as easily. You will be able to. I'll show you how to do that. But so I want to take a second, and I want to make sure that I want to try to turn these, make sure that they're tightened into my blade holder. Of course, all my parts they still rattle a little bit because this isn't tight yet. But in a moment it's going to be tight. And I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get those nuts in place. Now you'll notice that those nuts stick out a little bit, which isn't going to be a problem going into this section because this metal disc meets up against the inside of that really nicely. If I was planning on using a choke section, obviously the inside of the choke section is too big for me to test fit, but I know that these nuts are actually going to butt into this. Now once I tighten on my double male gender changer, that's not going to be a problem. But if you wanted a cleaner fit, you can take this, and this is one that I've actually drilled with, I think it's 5/16 drill bit. Yeah, 5/16 drill bit. I've drilled those 2 holes so that the nut, when it's on there, actually sits flush. If you wanted to do that, I'm not going to worry about that today. This is going to work perfectly well the way it is. So I've got my chassis assembled, got my nuts on. I'm going to use some pretty heavy-duty snips in order to cut those off. Now, because I'm using, like I said, because I'm using a MHS double female body section like that, I could leave a little bit on there. I don't have to. So I'm going to cut it at about 1/8 of an inch. You need good hand strength to be able to snip that off. And the other one. Now those are pretty rough. And if I was to try to unthread those nuts, they're not going to go over that because the thread is all mangled. So I'm going to show you what to do about that. But before I do, to tighten these up, you can use, where is it? Needle nose pliers. You can use needle nose pliers, but sometimes with using needle nose pliers on nuts, you slip, you miss, you pinch yourself, you scrape up your material. You can get, instead, here's a 5mm socket. It works, but what's best is a 3/16 socket. Fits right over the nut, allows you to tighten it up nicely. And you don't even have to use your socket wrench. That diameter gives you good finger strength. And you can feel it. I can feel it in my hand. The chassis is already tightened up, really nice and solid. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my Dremel and a sanding wheel, and I'm going to just carefully sand these off to a nice flush surface. And what I'm aiming to do is to clean up that munched, mangled section of threads, so that when it comes time to, to make these nuts come off, because I haven't done any of my wiring yet, then it'll do so much more easily. You want to wear eye protection when you're doing this. Just a little bit of work there. I haven't finished there, but you get the idea. That gives me a nice finish, and will be easy to get those nuts off. But that is basically my chassis. It's going to fit in like that. Like I said, you may want to do some of the wiring before you have it completed. It is possible, if you're careful, to wire it all up this way. I'm going to take my my double male, and I'm going to, it's a pretty tight fit, but I'm going to slide it over all of these discs and get it into position, because it will not slide over that, and that's the idea. So I put my chassis in position. I start to thread this together. You want to make sure your threads are clean. If you want a link to a video describing how to clean and maintain the threads of your MHS parts, just click here, right here. And I'll provide a link to another video I did showing you how to clean and maintain these parts with a toothbrush and some basic grease. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten that up. Now this is a point where, as you're tightening this up, if you want to line up your chassis, your recharge port, with any particular feature of the Saber, this is the point you want to do it, because once this is tight, you won't be able to turn that. So I want to line this up. Let's say I want to line it up with that little green mark that I have there. I also want to utilize a leather glove. I don't even have to put the leather glove on, just to grip the thread so I don't cut up my hands, because the threads can be quite tight. So it can be quite sharp. So now that's threaded in there, ready to go. I'm going to get some basic grease. I'll link to that in the description as well, because that's a basic grease is offered by the Custom Saber Shop. I'm going to put just a tiny little bit on the threads. I'm going to use a paper towel to massage it in, because what I want is, I want my Saber to go together and come apart. I want these two parts to work seamlessly together, but I want this threaded insert to stay connected to this. I could use a little bit of a temporary thread locker like this, a low strength removable thread locker, before I thread these together, to make sure that those parts are going to stay together. But you can experiment and see what works best for you. And now comes the time where I'm going to complete my Saber. Now imagine there's a blade holder on here. Now, if you find that you're having a hard time getting these parts to work together, here's a trick. Sometimes in the machining process there may be a little bit of a burr of metal on the inside of this, and it may want to catch or get stuck. So what you need to do, a little piece of sandpaper, fold it over like this. You basically rub it on the inside of that rim, not so much on your threads, but on that rim right there. And I'm just going to gently rub that around a few times and take off any burrs that might be in the metal. You can see where the sandpaper has worn away some of the inside diameter. Now before I want to put it together, I want to take my toothbrush, clean out the threads. Really good, that's an important step. Of course I can lubricate those threads with a little bit of grease as well. And now I'm going to find that just slides over, and I can actually turn it, and it spins on the chassis. It doesn't get caught up on the chassis, which is what I want. Then I can just thread my Saber together. You can see that I've got a perfect amount there. If I tuck the wires in where the speaker would go, my pommel's going to go on. I want to make sure that thread's on. And then you can, again, take it apart this way. And if I did my job right, this threaded double male will stay inside this part because this end is lubricated. So I have a Saber now with a nice, clean, beautiful chassis. A couple of things to point out. If your Saber is built like this, if you're using this chassis idea, you got a kill key that fits in your recharge port like that, well, that's not going to fit inside your Saber. So you're going to need to complete the Saber without a kill key in there. Now, depending on the sound card that you're using, whether you want to use a kill key, what you may want to do, it is tricky but it is possible, is to mark where this lines up, the recharge port in your Saber, and you can mark that exact dimension. I'm just going to do it quickly. You can precisely measure where your parts butt up, where the recharge port, the center of the recharge port is, and it is possible to drill a hole that will work so that when your Saber is completed and threaded together, that the recharge port is exposed in a hole. And that will allow you then to feed your kill key in through the body of the Saber into your recharge port. Obviously when it comes time then, again, to unscrew the Saber, you need to remove the kill key before you unscrew it, otherwise it'll pinch in there. But if you're careful and you're precise, you can measure that hole. And if you get it a little bit wrong, then you can use your Dremel and you can just make the hole a little bit larger in the direction that you need in order for it to center perfectly on your recharge port. And if you find that when the Saber's threaded together, it doesn't quite line up, well, you can then unscrew this section, turn your chassis a little bit, and screw it back together and refit it. It takes time, and it's a precise way of working, but it is possible to get a hole in the body line up with the recharge port. One other thing I wanted to point out in building the Saber, and the reason I used these spacers and left lots of space between my Petite Crouton and the recharge port here is because I still want to be able to get access to the SD card. So if I push it in with a pencil, you hear it click and it pops out, and I can use needle nose pliers and I can very carefully, I don't know if you're able to see it, I can very carefully pull out the SD card, and I've got enough room, enough clearance that I can pull it out, put that into my computer, make changes. I can fit it in again, and then carefully with a pencil I can slide that into place. Click. It fits nice and perfect. So you want to make sure you think about where your wires are going to run, any clips that you need to use, so that when you build your chassis you've got room for all the different things that you're going to need the inside of your Saber to do. So there you go. That is an example of how to build one style of inner chassis for your lightsaber with parts from the Custom Saber Shop. Again, you need to experiment, play, order more parts than you need so you have different options as you're learning and as you're going, so that you can build the style of chassis that works best for your Saber. And if you're able to, you're going to be able to find that the Saber's more solid, more secure, the wires are run much more clean, and you're going to enjoy that a great deal. So thanks again for watching.